welcome everybody. I think I'll get started since we're on a bit of a time. So welcome, I'm Vicki Bungie and I am the Associate Director, for those of you who don't know me, here at the School for Research and Teaching Scholarship. And I am excited today for us to have nursing rounds. And before I introduce John, I would just take a moment to acknowledge that we are at UBC in the School of Nursing. We are on the unceded traditional and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, and also acknowledge that many of us live, work, and play within the unceded territories of Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish Nation as well. And so I invite everybody to take a moment and reflect on where they are today and their relationships with the land and with the communities and Indigenous peoples that have been here for time immemorial. And it is with my great pleasure to introduce Dr. John Oliffe, who's here today to share this program of research with us and those kinds of things. And I will leave it to John to tell us a little bit more about him and what he's going to talk about today. So thanks everyone, and over to you, John.
Yeah, thanks, Vicki. And look, thanks for the opportunity to do the nursing res. I think the last time I was to bat was 10 years ago. I think it was 2014. So anyway, I hope I'm saying something new in the next 45 minutes and not peddling the same stuff. But just to say, increasingly, it's pretty rarefied air that we breathe in this gig, you know, where you're sort of paid to think. And I'm super interested in a few things around equity and also about these commercial determinants of health, which are starting to play. And so I'm a little bit, you know, going to just share some thoughts that I have, as well as a couple of projects that are kind of current, and some ideas for things going forward. And I hope that they resonate, you know, at some level. So just to say, you know, we've been thinking about this for a long time. We've been doing a ton of empirical work. And when I say we, there's a few of us over here at the Men's Health Research Program, involving, you know, coordinators, research assistants. We've got some people helping us out with the IT and the web and the social media that goes along with that, and some PhD students. So just a shout out that the productivity that comes out of this joint is pretty much tied to these folks who show up and put in and keep everything kind of moving. Increasingly, I don't think I could do my job without them, which is it's good that I've got good people in the house, just to say. Let's just start with, you know, where we were to 2005. I think, you know, we talked about a discordant relationship back in the day, and by that I mean a discordant relationship between men's depression and suicide. So men were diagnosed, or still are diagnosed, with depression at about half the rate of women, and they suicide, you know, 3 to 4 times the rate. So it was kind of this black box that turned out to be orange, I guess, so they could find it. But just to say that there was this kind of situation where we didn't really understand, you know, those pathways. And it's not to suggest that suicide is the only route. That depression is the only route to suicide. It's to say that, you know, it's one of the pathways, and we know that severe depression is linked very strongly to suicide in men. So we became really interested in this discordant relationship, and it's kind of where we started. I did this paper back in the day in 2021, and we kind of looked at, you know, what the state of knowledge was in Canada. You know, oftentimes, you know, you've been in the game a while and it's like 15 years later and you sort of put your head up and go, oh, you know, what has been done and where are we? And this coincided with me being on Public Health Agency of Canada on a committee that I think we met for 5 years trying to devise a suicide prevention policy for Canada. We still haven't managed that, and the committee no longer meets. But just to say, I went back into the empirical stuff, and this is Canadian work. It's 2000 to 2020, and then we published it in 2021. They named it a systematic review. It's actually a scoping review, but just to say, the part that's probably relevant today is this, you know, of these 68 articles that we pulled and did a review of. I think that health inequities piece is kind of interesting to sort of just revisit. So just to say that the articles fell in 3 domains: health inequities, age-specific, you know, younger men plus middle-aged men and older guys, so kind of across the spread, more than nearly half of them, and then occupation. But just in terms of the health inequities piece, sexual minority men accounted for 12 of those articles, Indigenous men for 8, and others living in marginalising conditions. So, they were often around homelessness, immigrant men and incarcerated men, those others, so to speak. It just was really interesting. A few observations of having, looked at these 68 articles and try to make sense of where we are in the field. It was super helpful to sort of just think about the descriptions and the put forward about, particular subgroups being worthy of tailored interventions was really, really strong, really, really rich. And it was interesting that when we were trying to classify these different papers, we had a bit of a time with it because people live across the intersections of many of these categories by which we lead with papers or assign classifications. So, that'd be your intersectionality piece. But again, just saying that many of the guys fell into, multiple subgroups, which is just kind of interesting when we're thinking about this call, because most discussions and conclusions ask for tailored programs, which is fair enough, because the social determinants of health, if we're addressing inequities, would be about tailored programs. But there was a very, very low rate of translation from these descriptive works to interventions. And fair enough, you might not find those in empirical works, to be able to sort of pick those up, but they're really not in the literature. So we're not seeing a lot of things translate. So this is just a little setup for later on as I start to talk a little bit about the commercial determinants of health. It's interesting. I think ED&I is the remedy to suicide prevention. I actually think it is, because if you look at, Terence Joyner's work where he talks about thwarted belongingness and perceived burdensomeness, I mean, really, if we could get equity, diversity, and inclusion right, we'd be nixing this. So again, it's just to say that, if we really think about the utility and the power of the ED&I piece, I think it can make a real difference in the space of suicide prevention in Canada and more globally. I think too, health promotion is interesting to me, politically motivated, articulated model of care. And we tend to sort of bank on population public health figures, because I think it's somehow more consumable. I think politically it's easier to engage. And so then the default position with big numbers is that we talk about healthcare services and the shortfall there. Health promotion does a really good job of being in the community. And I always say, well, Canada invented it. Like the Ottawa Charter, the whole piece, I just think we've got such a rich history in it and it's alive and well. And I would argue that health promotion right now has never, ever been more relevant. I think we do need the community work. So this piece around, we often play this slide and we say, oh, up to 60% of the men who suicide have accessed healthcare in the last 12 months. And certainly we've done some work around better identifying depression in men. We've done some work around better educating healthcare providers. But I think this also lobbies us, especially in the mental health space, to think about how health promotion can be advanced going forward. So I'll share a couple of examples of some work that we've recently done that I think talk to equity. And this first one is, equity begins at home. So for the longest time, we've been doing, male suicide prevention and looking at suicidality. And it's so interesting to me that for a long time, we've talked about, broken relationships or distressed and disrupted relationships as being involved or part of the story. And Movember came to me, I think it was just before the pandemic, and they said, oh, we actually we'd like to better understand men's relationships so as we could get upstream to try and educate them in having better relationships or amicably leaving relationships. So it was kind of interesting. Usually we bank on our own ideals or we come up with things that we want to think about and then sort of investigate. But this was one of those ones that I hadn't thought about. And so when Movember sort of came to me, first thing you do is dig into the literature. We found a few things just in terms of the scoping review. It is true that guys in relationships that are going well benefit, in terms of their emotional wellness. They drink less, their moods are better. You know, so those sorts of things. So that adage that married men live longer, so to speak, or attached men live longer, you know, actually does play out in the literature. By contrast, you know, distressed relationships, we noted that there was a lot more mental health issues for those guys, especially around depression, anxiety, and suicidality. So it did sort of bank in terms of the empirical fodder for that. One of the other things we noticed was that when the literature, when it was talking about guys in relationships, it was like relationships happen to guys. Like it's not like they went in with an idea about what they were going to achieve or what they wanted or what their end goal was, or even the details of being connected to someone else. So it was kind of interesting because it contrasted many of their other plans for career and different parts, even recreation. They had ideas about what they enjoyed and things like that. And so relationships were kind of a bit of a blind spot, we found, in terms of the literature, what it was saying. The vast majority of the services for guys about their relationships were downstream. Often they would be sort of summons to go in the realm of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, to get some help. So it was kind of corrective kind of services that were there. And then, of course, when they asked us to do this pre-COVID, by the time we'd collected the data, we had sort of spoken to guys a little bit about, you know, the COVID context and things like that, because many of the guys were pretty fresh in terms of their breakups. And so it was interesting in that way as well, because, you know, what we found is that the timing of this was really, really interesting. People were genuinely interested in knowing a bit more, you know, about guys' relationships, you know, because the divorce rates were up. They say the divorce rates are down now. I think that's because not so many people are getting married. So it's sort of, you know, going in that way. But there's still a lot of breakups. So we interviewed 50 guys from Australia and Canada, and that was at the request of Movember for those two markets, as they call them. And so what we did is cut some empirical findings off that, you know, in terms of their mental health, in terms of their help seeking for relationships. So it gave us some good insight. We also interviewed 30 clinicians who work with guys in the relationship space, predominantly in the corrective space. And we published a couple off there as well that were super interesting in terms of their insights. So many of them were psychologists. And it's interesting to me that often they'll talk about masculinities within a framework in the way that they work with guys in relationship, you know, services and therapy. So it's kind of just an interesting sort of frame. So loved writing these papers, got really good insights, and this was in the aftermath of guys breaking up. And so we thought, look, we'll have a crack at Shirk and see if we can get some support to ask guys what are equitable and sustainable intimate partner relationships. So we did this with 110 guys from across the world, which is a really neat study. We report out the straight identifying guys here, the 92 who identified as straight, in terms of what they said about equity, equitable, sustainable relationships. So we came up with three kind of classifications, if you like. So I'll just share them with you. First is what we'd say is a neo-traditionalist. So about 25%, a quarter of the guys fell into what we would categorize as neo-traditionalists. And it's really about these traditional roles within a partnership. So this guy is talking about the purchase of a vehicle, 50-50. They both him and his partner earn the same amount of money, but he's quite dissatisfied with the decision to even have the car, and there's some resentment there. And he says, for us, generally, I think about the cost of it. She has much more idea about the decoration stuff, and we have two separate decisions. Then she wins, that's all. So it's this appropriation where he's positioning it as a loss, where his partner wins. And so even though the household income is equally derived, the expenditure, he wants more say and he wants to have control of that. So it's kind of that old role play, that kind of place where, you know, defined roles and duties are sort of assigned. And he's bucking up against that. And he recognises that things are changing, but he's also tied to this, what we call neo-traditionals. Second one, quite simply, is about, we called it egalitarian, but it's about equality. And so many of the guys talked about their relationships in terms of a 50-50 split, like an equal amount of contribution to the relationship. So if someone was cooking 3 nights, then someone else would be cooking 3 nights, and then there might be a night out in the 7th, that sort of stuff. So quite delineated. And here's a guy who's just moved in with his partner, and it's a pretty big deal because girls usually have so many more clothes. For her to let me have that very boyish right side of the dresser, that's pretty awesome. So it's this lovely, situation of equality. It's half and half. But of course, the challenges came here for a lot of the guys when it was a hard count. And so that 50-50, when there was a perception that maybe the partner wasn't doing as much, and then things were shifting and maybe not contributing, there was a high level of potential for resentment. So 50% of the guys fell into this one. And then equity or progressive. And this is an interesting one. About 25% of the guys really got it, really understood what equity was. So many of the guys we'd ask about equity and they'd actually talk about equality. But for 25%, they sort of had much more of an idea that it was related to justice and fairness, that it wasn't a cross-sectional moment, that it was an ongoing part of the relationship where you needed to check in, deeply tied to communication within the context of equity, in terms of figuring things out as when. And this is just a lovely quote. I won't read it all. I just think his reference here, that space of empathy, is really important. And then we're both in the same kind of level playing field. So these guys weren't pleasers by any stretch. They were able to articulate what they wanted within the relationship as well, recognizing that at different points and transitions, parenthood, job loss, bereavement, all of those things that intersect with the relationship, then there needed to be adjustments about who was doing what. Seems pretty simple. We were pretty happy. We don't get social science and medicine very often. When we get social science and medicine, it's a big day for us. And so we get the paper into social science and medicine, into the mainframe. If we had a bell here, we would have rung it that day. But just to say, got it in. Then we thought, well, we better do a press release around this one. It's newsworthy, which was, part of our KT. Super interesting. Put the press release out, got lots of interest in it, got picked up by a whole bunch of outlets, which was great. And the findings got misrepresented, which is, kind of challenging, a little bit tough. And so, we said that all men fit into 3 masculinity categories. And it's not what we said, but again, I think it's sometimes people pick it up. And I think who especially got a hard time were the progressives, So this guy, they've taken an image off a Getty's image and they've published it with their article suggesting that, this bloke's knitting because he's a progressive guy. And so, that old KT thing of any publicity is good publicity, always a bit of a tough one. It's a great reminder too that there's a discourse around equity in terms of relationships. And I think that this was a pushback. So many of the comments that were, inserted into this press release by readers were pretty damning in terms of, this craving for the neo-traditionalists. So again, lots of interesting things beyond the research in terms of its findings. What did happen, I guess, with the publicity was that we did get some traction to what we did with a quiz that was around that paper. So super helpful in terms of getting some traction. And you could do the quiz, and you can still do the quiz on our website there. And it helps you to think about neo-traditionalist, egalitarian and progressive in terms of defining what equity is. We also built a couple of 3D and 2D, online kind of spaces for the photographs and captions, which are really good. We didn't get a ton of traction there. I think, there's a few things that we learned that we've written in this paper about the case for and against doing virtual photo voice, just to sort of help us make sense of some of that. I think that sometimes, that in-person piece around photographs is still really important to a lot of people. So making time, and maybe the web isn't the perfect place for them, but the interactivity of the quiz time, that was where we got our most traffic. So, that idea that you have to engage your end users. And again, just to round this out, November in the midst of making some decisions about developing some upstream, relationship work for guys, so as they can be better equipped to work through their relationships and be better within the relationship, plus or minus amicably leaving. So again, sort of just working within this context. The second one I want to share with you briefly is just, current one that's being run by Paul Sharp, who's a postdoctoral fellow with me, and got picked up in the draft by University of New South Wales. Unfortunately, we missed him at UBC. But just to say, he wrote this grant, and it's really about, this peer support in terms of reducing male suicide. So again, this kind of equity informed the notion that you build something that's tailored. So we kind of responded to this, this notion that the loneliness and isolation is really huge. I think it's a post-COVID hangover. I think it was well ingrained before that. And so always, interested in the epidemiology of a problem, and that we're now saying out of the US that the male suicide rates are on the increase. I think, a lot of times the data lags, but also I think with transitions, you often see the outcome of those transitions after the fact. So as we're transitioning out, I think you see the full brutality of what COVID was. And so, part of the default position is that, we should be better to each other. We should more meaningfully connect. And I think that's really true and important, and especially in terms of suicide prevention. So this from November, which I do like, it's called ALEC. And because a lot of people will say to me, well, how do you connect with someone with a guy who's maybe not traveling all that well? The idea of just asking with those open-ended questions and giving the guy kind of permission to talk, I think is really important. The listening part is not something that we always do very well. And I think especially if you think, a friend or a mate or a buddy is in trouble, you tend to want to help solve problems, and jump in there or know what the problem is. And sometimes it's really just about listening and giving that opportunity for processing, and to encourage action. And that bit where, you're not providing the answer, but you're sort of circling back into what's worked in the past. So a few things about introducing ideas about, what kind of level of sleep they're getting, bits and pieces like that, to try and just give the guy some room to chat, but also, get it into a positive space about, beyond the problem, what might be some potential solutions. And the one that guys tend to do really badly is we don't really check back in. And it's super important, this check-in, because if a guy has, managed to sort of talk about an issue that might be around mental health, and you've managed to listen and you've encouraged a little bit of action, the check-in is really important, because after the fact, they often feel really vulnerable for having said too much and over-disclosed. So the idea of going back in. So again, this ALEC acronym, super, super helpful. All sounds pretty easy. Turns out it's not. So Paul Sharp's work, it's SHRC funded. It's called In Good Company. And Paul's done this great work with Photo Voice and going to guys and asking them about what they need to connect, how they connect, in order to, promote other guys' mental health. Really good work. I'll share 3 photographs with you that just sort of, I think, help us, understand the complexities of this. So this one's called Fragmented. I titled it Fragmented just because there's so many branches coming off. I really thought the broken branches near the bottom represented current societal attitudes towards men's peer support. It dug into the ground broken, and a few branches that are still growing up are a changing of attitudes in terms of progression. So I think a lovely reference point to the idea that we'd like to think that we have these conversations and that they're all kosher and easy to have and able to build. But there's still that sort of that element of they're hard to garner and get. And this one, similarly, does a similar piece where it just sort of says, it positioned, they're sharing a sunset, these guys are hanging out, and you know, he's got some stuff on his mind, but he can't quite articulate what it is. And so I think a lot of the time it's going to be just trying to process everything in your own head, knowing that you're not really going to be that great communicating it, getting it, because you don't really fully understand it yourself, managing the awkwardness of that conversation from the very beginning of having to try and overcome that. It just becomes a little bit overwhelming to even begin to have that conversation. So I think it's a lovely, lovely reminder about this idea that somehow the guy needs to be rational and have it together in terms of being able to articulate what's going on for him to be able to make sense to the listener. So again, you know, those ideas about, you know, how we might connect with peers for support, you know, and how this might bridge or not, you know, be a barrier to having that. And this one I really like as well, you know, the only way to get you here. I think as men, it is not in us to just meet because it's not. Let's just see each other and talk and speak. It always has to be something else involved. It always has to be beers or playing billiards or going for tennis or a soccer match or boxing or whatever. I don't think we're just able to simply ask. I don't understand why maybe we don't see an actual benefit in simply talking. So again, just a super reference to, you know, that idea that a lot of times guys will connect over booze and you know, it might not necessarily be all that productive and it might remain superficial. So it's just trying to get below the surface. So these are some of the things of the 65 participants that they kind of shared in terms of the challenges. So I just think it complexifies the ALEC acronym. You know, it's like you've got these little tools, but you know, it's much more complicated. So Paul's done a great job of you know, developing the website. This is going to get launched the week of Men's Health Week, which is June 9, 10, I want to say. And so just in terms of a little playful stuff around, you know, what kind of buddy are you? What kind of buddies do you have? A little bit of a quiz to get you started, and then some things around, you know, getting connected, checking in and reaching out. So, and what's shared there underneath that is the guys' data in terms of their photographs and their captions, and then a few ideas about what you might saliently take away from, you know, having looked at those. So I think we learned a little bit from the men's relationships one, where we just put the captions and the photographs. We've been a bit more directive here in terms of the messaging that we're trying to convey. I think this will be interesting too. Paul's done a terrific job of hosting a podcast. We've got I think 5 or 6 episodes in the bag. They're really, really good. And so that's going to be part of the intervention, so to speak, on this website, the moving part of this. So we're really looking forward to seeing how this goes in terms of, you know, its acceptability, its feasibility, and if people are chiming in on it. So again, really, really innovative work and a way to bring this together. So I just want to say a couple closing things around equity, and then I'll go into the commercial determinants of health briefly, just to say that I remember when I started here as a rookie, Angela Henderson, who was on faculty, said to me one time after a faculty meeting, she said, if you're in a place long enough, you'll hear the same thing again. And I don't remember my reaction totally. I don't think it was like, I don't think I had a lot to say, but I was struck by those words when I look back at Jake Epp out of Ottawa Charter, like 1986. Health promotion implies a commitment to dealing with the challenges of reducing inequities, extending the scope of prevention and helping people to cope with their circumstances. I won't read it all, just to say a lot of times we think we're doing something new. This has been on the card in Canada for a very long time. And so this resonates. I think Jake could get a gig right now. I think he's talking the speak. I think we're in a better political climate to do this work. And hence my my nagging about health promotion, that it's alive and well and needs to be, you know, named and really pushed forward. I think we've got a problem with semantics, though. I think, you know, equity in and of itself is a tough term. You know, I think I've got a few mates in banking and catch up for a drink, and, you know, it's kind of interesting because, you know, when I talk about equity to them, it's completely different to what we're talking about in health. So I think some of the some of the uncertainty about the language, when we spoke to guys about relationships and they were talking about equality, not equity, many of them didn't know what equity is. And I just in terms of, you know, we often talk about things like people understand what it is we're saying. And for me, it was a great reminder that the term might, you know, be something that we need to think about, you know. Finally, I just want to sort of shout out that we've had a ton of interventions over the year, over the 20 some years of being here. The top one there, the Men Building Better Relationships, the investment was 237,000. Power Play, the one underneath, that was a program that we built for guys who work in male-dominated industries, and it was to get them moving, help them with their mental health. So it was in person, where oftentimes these companies would compete against each other and there'd be prizes. BC Cancer invested, or Canadian Cancer Society invested near $1 million in that. The one underneath is called Quit Now Men. There's a $100,000 investment from CIHR, and it was a tailored program, e-health program, to help guys think about quitting. It got some good traction. If I Were Tom, that was a $450,000 investment from CIHR. It was about prostate cancer, and we built this website for guys who couldn't make it to a prostate cancer support group, so as they could actually go online and get many of the resources that they would have got in person. Hat Trick was as north, I want to say, of 300,000 out of CIHR, and we ran this out of the Rockets Hockey Amateur League out of Kelowna. It was to engage guys in their middle age who might have been carrying a little bit of weight, to help them come into the hockey arena and actually, in a group situation, run an 8-week course to help, you know, sort of get them into a little bit of exercise and a little bit of nutrition, and sort of, you know, help them kind of maybe change lifestyle at a point where they were a bit sedentary. And Dig, you know, Dads in Gear, you know, multiple investors in this one, probably north of you know, be tilting $1 million, the investment on this. And this was a program where we, you know, the emphasis had been on women in pregnancy stopping smoking, and our tilt with Joan Batorf leading this was that we would look at dads and help them to start quitting smoking, because we knew that there was benefits for everybody if we could do that. We launched this into an Indigenous men's program as well. And so, you know, sort of managed to sort of reinvent it. You know, and we've been as far as Hawaii to work with this program. So again, you know, really, really good products. But they all suffer the tumbleweed effect, and that is that they all died with the grants that funded them. So the way in which we do business is we tend to get funded, we describe the problem, and we build out an intervention, oftentimes now within the one grant. It's just expected, and it's what we do. But the tumbleweeds that are those products that are lying in the dead space without any funding, where you don't have the resources to update them, you know, it makes it really tough, because they age and they date and they die. So I'll close out with commercial determinants of health. It's just an interesting space. So predominantly what we've done is we've gone to places like CHR, SHRC, and we've asked for money. We build the things, and there's not really a whole lot of avenues that you can go to sustain product or build product out. Commercial determinants of health are interesting because what's happened with those is they've tended to get a bad rap. And it's fair enough. Like, I mean, if you think about 1/3 of the global deaths being assigned to alcohol, tobacco, fossil fuels, and highly processed foods, you can understand why there's a bit of a demonising of a lot of the commercial determinants of health. I'd encourage you to, you know, if you're at all interested in thinking about alternatives, that there might be some benefits in health and commercial determinants of health for health. There's a really good 3-article series out of the Lancet in October last year, where they sort of start to go, maybe there's a way that we could better do commercial determinants of health to advance health. I'll give you 3 examples, and just, you know, I'm not suggesting too much here in terms of, you know, collaboration, but I'm just shooting the breeze a little bit. So the gambling piece, I would argue at the moment, is tobacco. It's what tobacco was. So what they're doing is they're selling gambling. It's a huge industry, massive industry. Like the first quarter of 2023, there's 17.2 billion were wagered in Canada alone, of which the taxes were 650 million. So there's lots of beneficiaries as well. So the leagues that operate, you know, the overarching piece, like the NFL, so they are on the payroll as well. So something like the NFL picks up 2.3 billion a year from hosting games that are bet on. So the gambling industry gives them 2.3 billion. So there's lots of people who are beneficiaries. So my point in raising this is that it is a men's health issue. 78% of the online sports betting apps are owned by men. 94% of the gambling revenue comes from men, and men are 7.5 times more likely to have their lives negatively disrupted by gambling. So my argument here is to say, you know, I wonder if there's a way that we could have some money channeled back in to undoing some of this gambling, you know, ill health with addictions and substance use that goes along with some of this, and start to think about, you know, how they might invest in health promotion programs, or that there's a clearer delineation of the taxes that are picked up by government that come through to designated health promotion programs. It's my first one. My second one is beer and the rise of the nonny. You know, beer in the US is a $409 billion industry each year. And I love this story because it's about knowing your consumer. So the nonny is a non-alcohol beer. And the reason that breweries are now making non-alcohol beer is because in the health conscious group, predominantly men 30 to 44 years of age, the consumption of full alcohol beer has gone down. So it went down quite markedly. So they were losing this market. And so they produced the nonny beers. And so Heineken out of 2023 picked up 77 million selling non-alcoholic beer. It's almost unimaginable that they would sell non-alcoholic beer when their business has been very much, you know, tilted in a different direction. My point with this is that, you know, they know audience, or they actually know their end users and they follow them. And so with us in health promotion, a lot of the things we build are the utopia of changing behaviours, but they made adjustments based on behaviours that were occurring. And so to the masculinities piece and to the men's health piece, we've often talked about, you know, traditional masculinity as the centerpiece, and then all these behaviours emerging from it. I think what we've ignored is a generation or two or three of young men that are doing health differently. So again, I just think that's one of the things that we can think about. I also, you know, I think about the potential for collaborating with breweries that are only producing nonny beer as a way of actually, you know, selling some health. That they can sell harm reduction and health promotion at profit is just, it's super interesting to me. So just to say. The third one is athleisure wear. Again, this is going to be, they reckon by 2028, it's going to be a $549 billion industry. And athleisure wear, it refers to, you know, that apparel that's acceptable for non-athletic settings. And it really has changed the game, you know, in sports retail. I think, you know, in Vancouver, we've got a soft spot for Lululemon. It kind of came from here. It's kind of ingrained a lot of the things a lot of the values, I think, that were here. Super interesting brand, predominantly for women at the start. But of course, you know, in terms of market segmentation, they open it up. They're very interested in guys, and they have got market penetration. They've done really well selling the same equipment and really street leisure, you know, to street leisure, you know, outfits to guys. It's a kind of a gender mainstreaming story. So I just say with this, they produce a report that's primary research each year, and it's produced from the Centre for Social Impact. and they annually report with the goal of disrupting inequity in global well-being. I mean, they're selling health, and they're really on point with so much of the work we do. If you think about the other one, another brand that was kind of quite gendered, Under Armour was really predominantly for guys. They kind of came out with a T-shirt that would draw the sweat away from you, so you wouldn't be holding sweat. It was called the Wig. And that was their start in 1996. So it was predominantly for guys because it was usually under the gridiron, pads. And again, they very much started to rethink their market segmentation, started to gender mainstream, and then sort of went into starting to sell to women as well. So it's super interesting. Both these companies have ventured into e-health acquisitions to build their brand community. And just to say, Under Armour sold theirs for a loss. So they acquired these different e-health pieces and couldn't work it. And Lululemon just wrote off $500 million an investment for the e-health space. It's just a reminder, I think, that industry needs academe as much as academe needs industry sometimes. Just to say that I think sometimes the true research, can be empirically done by folks who have been in the game for a while. So just to say, I think there's some reciprocity there. I think the overarching message that I'm trying to say with the commercial determinants of health, I think we should be diversifying. With a 15%, chance of getting up at nationals, with CHR and Shirk and the like, I do think there's an opportunity to sort of start to think about how that might be. There might be other avenues. School of Nursing has been really, really good at it over many years. We've gone to lots of different places, and I just think it might be time that we started to think about commercial determinants of health. To that point, I was on a call with Trevor this morning, and just to say there is an opportunity coming forward that's about these small grants, 125 over a year, structural determinants of health catalyst grants. It's worth a look. Just to say that I think that, part of the education around trying to understand, in part, commercial determinants of health, but also the structural piece, school's been amazing at describing lots and lots of problems and challenges for individuals, and we've been great at building things in terms of interventions and programs. I just think that this could be a nice entree into getting a bit of a sense of the structural piece that maybe hasn't been a blind spot. We talk about it all the time, but maybe in rethinking how we engage it from an empirical basis. Thank you. It's good to be back after a decade or longer. And don't forget to follow us and all those sorts of things, blah, blah, blah. And shout out to Vicky and Marilee for setting this up, and thank you. Yeah.
Just thanks, everybody. Have a great day. And again, thanks, John, for a fantastic hour with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks again. Take care. Cheers.